here. I'd like to welcome everyone to this webcast. It's the first, as Nick said, in this series of Inspiring the Future, where we're actually looking at a little bit of the theme of resilience, which is so apropos in these times. And when you think about it, we all really could use some heroes these days, and the BC Sports Hall of Fame is full of them. And hopefully with their stories, we can inspire, educate, and motivate all of you out there as we all try to navigate our way through this COVID-19 pandemic. Well, joining me today is someone who really needs no introduction. He's a 3-time world champion, a 9-time Paralympic medalist. He's the founder of the Rick Hansen Foundation, which works to create an inclusive world where people with disabilities can live to their full potential. And of course, in the mid-1980s, his 26-month Man in Motion World Tour inspired the world as he went about in his wheelchair, raising awareness of issues and people with disabilities. He is inductee in the Canadian Sports Hall of Fame, and of course, he's a BC Sports Hall of Fame honored member. Welcome, Rick Hansen.
Hi, Wendy. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I'm looking forward to this, and also super honored to be here, given it's a reflection of all the wonderful work that the BC Sports Hall of Fame does.
It certainly does. And as I say, the Hall of Fame is full of heroes and full of stories, and we can all take inspiration from everybody who's in there, including you today.
Well, thank you. And by the way, I just want to say a huge thank you to you, because you were one of the very first journalists that actually took the time to cover me as an athlete, and of course on my Man in Motion World Tour, back when very few people actually really were involved. And I just want to say a huge thanks for helping continue to carry that story and to help people respond and make a difference.
Well, thank you for making a difference, not only locally, but around the world. The world has changed because of you. So let's get started. Rick, these are strange and kind of trying times for everyone. How goes it with you and your family, first of all?
Yeah, you know, it's really interesting. The concept of the COVID era and the shock waves that hit us, you know, and not just the physical, tangible things, but the intangibles, the emotional, the psychological. It's really trying to gather the information as it comes, and then to reframe the way you think about it. And I can imagine the scenario in our little office of the Rick Hansen Foundation. We're, you know, sort of loaded with a full-blown schedule for 2020, and we heard about this story in China, you know, in the early days of this virus, and it seemed so far away and so disconnected from our reality. And then all of a sudden, a few weeks later, it started to become a potential issue here. Then shortly thereafter, there was perhaps some concern by our staff about potentially traveling. And I was thinking, yeah, for sure, we'll protect the staff. I'll continue on these scheduled events. And then all of a sudden, a week later, it's like, oh my gosh, I have to be responsible because I'm connecting to my family, to my colleagues, to the community, and I don't want to be taking any risks in that behalf. And then a couple of days later, it's like, hey, hang on, I have a spinal injury, and I'm 62 years old. Oh my gosh, you know, and next thing you know, the event started to be canceled, and our whole year was turned completely upside down. And so there was a constant level of reframing, you know, gathering the information and staying so fluid and dynamic at a pace that was incredibly unusual. So I think that's been the biggest part of the adjustment, and it still continues to be fluid to this day.
It absolutely does. I mean, it's, and I think everybody's going through their own version of that. It's like every day they think, okay, well, maybe I can do this. And then 2 days later, well, it's not that, I can't do that. And it again speaks to this whole idea of resilience, which is a little bit of bouncing back. You're confronted with a challenge, an issue. How do you deal with it? How do you confront it? How do you move forward? And a little bit of maybe making that lemonade after you've been confronted with a pile of lemons, right? So
Yeah,
um,
exactly. Well, yeah, and
yeah,
for me, of course, is pretty much gathering those facts continually, and then being responsible, making sure that health comes first for yourself and for everyone else, and then to then start to re-engage again. Our staff worked remotely. We were transitioned. Everybody has their own unique challenge. You know, there are people who have parents. You know, they're caregivers. People have children. People who have physical and other levels of disability that are not so visible, and including mental health, and wanted to be able to make sure that that environment was fully supportive, and yet at the same time utilizing technology. And for those of us who are immigrants to the idea of technology and still learning every day, it was a big learning curve. And wow, what an amazing opportunity for all of us to stay connected and to keep moving forward on the work of our foundation, and also to reach out to help others as you go forward. Because I think in this COVID era, you know, as it should be any time, but it's accelerated now. There are a number of people, our neighbors, our family members, our community members, who really need support and encouragement. And that's one thing we can do with the advantages of extra time, is be able to reach out and extend and support.
absolutely. And I like that about the extra time, being able to maybe do some things that we wouldn't normally be able to do. Now, thinking of this theme of resilience, and you know, when I think of your life, you have had to hone and exhibit resilience in many different ways, perhaps really beginning from that day when your life changed with the accident, and through your career as an athlete, through the Man in Motion world tour and all of the struggles and work that that entailed, and right through to founding the Rick Hansen Foundation and continually to work for people with disabilities and making it a better world for them. Can you talk about how you were able to overcome various types of adversity throughout your life?
Sure. I think, you know, the best thing is that the experience in being an athlete has, I think, helped me with some basic skills. And number one, you know, you get a chance to be able to really have a set of goals. You're working in, you know, applying determination and skill sets, and you're learning constantly. You're getting feedback from your coaches, your environment, your teammates, and your competitors. And so that ability to be disciplined, to set goals, and to continue to learn and grow, I think, in a fluid environment, is something that sets you up for when all of a sudden, out of the blue, a big trauma hits, you know, an unforeseen catastrophe or crisis. And of course, you know, when I had my injury at the age of 15, that came out of the blue, and now I was completely immobilized with no frame of reference to what my life would be like, living with paralysis and using a wheelchair for mobility. So it had to be a completely new learning curve, and I needed role models, coaches, family members, you know, people from the entire community to also be there to support me and learn that, you know. And maybe this was a bit of a learning curve, that it really was a shock of a youngster at the time, is that we're, no matter what you do in life, you know, and especially whether it's sport or something else, you might be an individual athlete, but no one gets anywhere on their own, and we're interdependent, not independent. And I think the key to our strength and resiliency is not just being self-regulating and having those internal disciplines and skills, but to be open to receive support and to look for inspiration and to learn and to grow as human beings. And that's been the key to my ability to stay, you know, in the pocket as all these curveballs have hit me, you know, on the journey of life. And while, you know, you never wish it on yourself and or anyone else, you know, and you still have to struggle and go through all the, you know, the emotions and you know, the mental health challenges, the anxiety and the depression, and then ultimately emerge forward. You know, the patterns become a little more familiar, and you can perhaps have greater hope. Because I think the key, Wendy, for everything in life, no matter how big the challenges are, is to have hope that this too will pass, and that there is a better world on the other side of this struggle that we're currently having.
Absolutely. Now, it's interesting you talked about the interconnectedness of people and how we need to be able to reach out and ask for help and also give help. And what's interesting is that there are a lot of connections within the BC Sports Hall of Fame who were fairly instrumental in helping you early on in your athletic career. Can you talk about some of those connections that you made through the Hall of Fame?
Yeah, like as I was trying to reframe, I to be honest, I didn't even know that that Paralympic sport existed. So when someone introduced it to me, it was sort of like, well, I don't know, these are sort of maybe special, inspirational athletes, but it's not really sport and it doesn't relate to me. But I ended up meeting an incredible manager of our wheelchair basketball team who recruited me, and his name was Stan Strong, and
Yes.
he encouraged me to get involved in wheelchair basketball. My phys ed teacher, Bob Redford, taught me that nowhere, in the definition of an athlete does it say that you need to use your legs in order to be one. And so then coming to the Vancouver Cable Cars team, I was blown away by, it was like a magic dream team. Eugene Reimer was the veteran athlete who was also a multi-sport athlete, and he was very much into field sports, and was a world and Paralympic champion. And he had actually received Canada's Outstanding Athlete of the Year for the male category, along with Karen Magnuson, and the female category in 1972. And I saw this guy, and he was like a god. I mean, I could not believe how athletically talented he was. And we ended up going into visit the BC Sports Hall of Fame because he was inducted there. And as we went through, we were not only blown away by his recognition and talents, but there were so many other athletes there identified through the hall. And as a young teenager, just still trying to figure out what life was about, it was truly inspiring. I'll never forget that moment. And then, of course, ending up being the guy who recruited Terry Fox to come to play with that team as well with us, and becoming great friends with Terry. I just feel so privileged that I was inspired by this athletic team in that era, with so many just amazing people who helped us kind of keep challenging each other and learning and growing.
And you were quite influenced by a visit that you made to the Hall of Fame. You didn't even know who was
Yeah,
there and that it existed, right?
that's right. When we went to this event as a team, it was at the Peony at the time, and right in the middle of the Hall of Fame was this huge map of British Columbia. It was a virtual map, and in 3D, and it was really quite spectacular, and it was just like, yeah, it was a real awakening. And yeah, I'll never forget that moment. And yeah, it really has impacted me. And then the relationship with the Sport Hall of Fame has been quite profound over all these years. The Hall of Fame actually was a big supporter of mine when it was time for me to pay it forward, using the lessons of former athletes, Stan Strong, Terry Fox, and think about making a difference. The executive director of the Sports Hall of Fame, Marshall Smith, and his assistant, Edie Ellers, were seconded to help us, and of course many boards of directors on the Hall of Fame were very engaged in helping us to kick off our journey. So without them, it would have been just a dream.
Well, let's talk about your Man in Motion World Tour now. That serves as such an inspiring example of overcoming adversity, to initiate change, to do something really spectacular and difficult. 26 months all the way around the world in a wheelchair. Let's talk about that. What do you remember about that? I mean, it's, a while ago now, but
Yeah.
is it, it must still be indelibly stamped in your psyche.
Yeah, it was an amazing experience for sure. And the danger, of course, over time is to smooth out the challenges and, and think of only the wonderful highlights and milestones and successes. But I guess through it all, I first of all, I think it's a great reminder for me and for anyone else is that you know, big dreams, they can come true, and if we have the courage to try to take those first steps, anything's possible. And yet uh, the power of people who are true difference makers, who come to help you at a time when things seem like they're either not going to start, or that you're partway through your journey and you know you're going to fail, or at least it appears that way, and then out of the blue comes somebody or something to help fill your sail with wind and keep you propelling forward on the long journey. I look back at it and I marvel at what in many ways, a miracle it was, and it happened almost in spite of me and our little team, so poorly prepared and unorganized and truly. I think the magic moment of the tour was the first day, having really got to the point where we were able to overcome all the negative energy, the self doubt, the fear of failure or success, the skepticism, and the real logistical deficiencies and funding challenges that we had had. We didn't have it perfect, but we knew that we had to leave and take that first step. And that day that we departed Vancouver from the Oak Ridge Mall was truly the greatest accomplishment of the entire tour.
Well, it's interesting because one of my assignments as a sports writer with the Vancouver Sun was to give you a call wherever you were in the world. It was pretty much a weekly call,
Mm-hmm.
and you and I would chat about how the tour was going, some of the trials and tribulations that you had. And for folks that might not remember, that was back in the day, mid 80s. There was no internet, there were no cell phones.
No,
Sometimes you would be talking to me from a phone in a little motel room somewhere. And I have to admit, there were some days that I really felt bad bothering you because I could hear the fatigue in your voice. Maybe if things hadn't gone well that day, I could hear it. And yet you still gave the interview, you still recounted what was going on. And I mean, it was inspiring to me, but you know, it went on a long, long time, and you did it. And that today just, it seems to be such again, a great athletic achievement, a great humanitarian achievement. So looking back at all of that hard work, what are some of the changes that it initiated that you're most proud of?
well, for me, I think in general, it really gave me a sense of gratitude about the power of teamwork, and you know, without the amazing group of people who responded and were with me and gave up their careers and helped push things forward, it would have never been possible. The second part is that I believe that it was at a time when people with disabilities were really so marginalized, and disability was largely considered a charity in many ways. There was the emergence of the human rights movement, a lot of really strong champions trying to say, no, 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 you know, yes, charity for specific things, but this is a human right for people with disabilities to be included in. Sport or other endeavors are a great mirror for how society views itself, its values of inclusiveness, and the Man of Motion tour, I think, was an example. If barriers were removed, you know, people with disabilities had potential and that they deserve to be part of society. And I think that, you know, responding to the individuals who were on the road that happen to have disabilities or champions, and seeing that we could come together. The world wasn't so big and disconnected as we thought, and have it be like a bit of a milestone for Canada as we came back on the last part of the Man of Motion tour. You know, I really believe that we've made a lot of progress since then. We're not there; we're maybe halfway on the long journey, but there's a lot to celebrate. And I know that we had a baby step sort of contribution to that, and I guess that's all you could ever ask for on the Man of Motion tour. You know, there was an iconic sign behind me when I finished the tour, it said, "Welcome home, Rick. The end is just the beginning." And so I didn't exactly realize what that was all about, but I truly do now. The grizzled veteran, all these years later, we're talking multi generations and big social changes in ultra marathons. So I do have a lot of gratitude for what the tour accomplished, and respect for what we did, but I also put it in perspective of there's still a long way to go.
Well, that's true. But, in preparing for this, I was trying to think back in the day, and little things now that just seem normal, or, of course, back in the day, there weren't dips in the sidewalks for wheelchairs. There weren't always ramps to buildings that we see today. Even on a daily basis, we're watching Prime Minister Trudeau give his daily address to the country, and there's someone signing his speech. I don't remember seeing anything of that magnitude back in the 1980s. And I think all of that, again, sparks from the awareness that you generated. These days, it's all kind of matter of fact, and we're used to seeing that. But a lot of that wasn't as prevalent. So you absolutely did make a difference in waking people up and educating them.
Well, thanks. It was nice to be part of the team, and of course, the other thing is that in the sports side, things have come a long way too. Still a long way to go, but in the era when I left on the Man in Motion tour, there were still quote, able-bodied athletes and disabled athletes, and they were all very distinctly separate. They wouldn't even consider, for instance, in the Sport Hall of Fame, to consider an athlete with a disability to perhaps be Athlete of the Year, and or to take the time to understand the sport so you could determine how it would stack up against any other sport. And then even Olympics and Paralympic Games. There were no Paralympic Games. There were no multi-sport games that really included athletes with disabilities as full medal participants. And I think that what we're starting to see more and more now is that people are looking at athletes who happen to have a disability as more of a distinguishing characteristic, but it's not the defining part of them as being an athlete. They're just athletes, and I think that's what most people really want to be recognized in life, just human beings. And if there's a uniqueness or a requirement to address something because of a disabling condition, we can maybe help customize or learn or adapt, and then just keep expressing the humanity of that individual.
Well, of course, we've seen an explosion of media interest and attention on events like the Paralympics, for instance, getting great exposure. Alas, we won't be seeing the Summer Olympics or the Summer Paralympics now till 2021 because of the virus. As an athlete, were you ever confronted with training for an event only to have it postponed, or can you relate or to what some of the athletes are going through right now, having maybe set their sights on competing this summer in Tokyo and now not being able to do that, having to wait another year? Do you have any advice for them?
Yeah, I've been part of that in general, not in the specific of having something completely canceled, but I was around in the era, of the 1980s with the boycott for the games in Russia, and so things evolved, and our games were modified in their location, and a lot of changes. It affected timing and regimes and this and that, but not something where something's been like canceled with a big long-term shift. But it's like anything else, when there's been a disruption, you can only control so many things, and then it's time to make the adjustment. And people are incredibly resilient and creative and innovative. So when they understand the parameters, then it puts everybody in motion to start to get creative. And one thing I know about top performing athletes, their coaching and support teams, is that where there's a will, there's a way. And I think that's the key, is you use the time, you adapt your training, and you stay in the game, and ultimately you figure out alternative ways to get to a place. But you also recognize everyone else is in the same general condition and under the same framework of rules. And so really, like in any competitive environment, it's how good can you adapt, and how much can you stay on that curve to emerge when the games are hosted again, or when the next opportunity to compete is, and you're ready, and maybe even stronger.
Well, that's interesting. You talked about athletes having to be creative and resilient in this manner. And I think we all have had to be a little creative and resilient as this pandemic wears on. It certainly turned most people's lives upside down. Can you talk a little bit about some of the special challenges that you're seeing through your foundation in terms of people with disabilities, and how they're having to cope and confront the pandemic and the changes that have been forced upon them because of it?
Yeah, it's been, again, it's a reflection still into this day and era, that people with disabilities, as a population, are essentially underrepresented in terms of the magnitude of the community itself. There's about 1 in 5 Canadians have a disability. It's a huge population, and it's growing rapidly with aging boomers, and their parents, and so yet we still haven't seen a very big response to disability as a whole, as a sector that needs to gain a little extra key support during this critical period. And the first is that people really, if they're in the healthcare environment, there's policies for isolation, and yet some people are completely isolated. They're not able to be connected to their, perhaps, interpreter, translator, caregiver, family member, and communication maybe is an issue, or the ability to be supported or comforted. And I, for instance, was just fielding a call where someone had had a spinal cord injury. They had a fall at home. They were a high lesion quadriplegic, and they were in the hospital, and the family wasn't able to come. They had a trach, and they couldn't speak. And and it was a really, really challenging period. Now, fortunately, the hospital adapted and were able to set up iPad and help exchange information and communication. But there are some people who get caught in a policy where that can't happen. They're overwhelmed with resources, and time issues, or people. And it's really, you can imagine when you're in one of the most critical times in your life and you feel like you're alone, trapped, can't communicate. Another person contacted us from Ontario, and they're in an extended care facility, and they were not feeling secure because the protocols for helping attending care supports, they were worried. They heard a lot of the stories of the outbreaks in specific extended care facilities, and they were feeling that they didn't get the extra level of support they needed because they had a disability, and also they wanted to keep that viral control right through the care support. And then there's others who are looking, and they're at home, and they're thinking about their level of transmission into their life. Maybe their transportation systems are gone. The family connectivity has been disrupted, and getting food, or the basics, to the basic income support, or maybe they're working and moving virtual, and yet they have unique adaptive communications technologies and requirements. And so there's a whole range of gaps that fall through the generic system. And I think what's really good is that there's a whole coalition of groups that represent people with disabilities that have come together, and they're advising the federal and provincial and municipal governments and Indigenous governments to try to really pay attention and to be guided in terms of how they can fill some of these gaps. And make sure that the most vulnerable and people with disabilities particularly don't get left behind.
Well, I think too, and it goes back to us talking about uh, we all have to look after one another in this time, and being able to reach out for help and also give help if we can. And if people are interested in perhaps helping folks with disabilities who are struggling at this time, I do have some information that your foundation sent to me in terms of people, if they want to contact you, if they want to help out or get more information. And I'll give out the site now, and then again at the end of the program. It's www.rickhansen.com, Rick Hansen, all one word, .com. So I encourage anybody who feels they can, if they want to lend a helping hand to someone out there, please do so. Please contact the foundation, and I'm sure they can put you in touch with someone who needs help, or find a way for you to use that energy out there to help someone.
Yeah,
And
that's
I will,
great. Thanks.
again, we'll do that again at the end of the show.
Yeah,
Now,
thanks,
Rick,
Wendy. I appreciate it.
you know full well the value of being fit and active, and you know how that helped you recover and really transform your life into becoming an elite athlete, which maybe you weren't necessarily thinking of back in the day when you were a teenager. And maybe staying fit is even more important this time, both for physical and mental well-being, for body and mind. Can you talk a bit about the importance of that, and perhaps how
Sure.
exercise helped you, and how we all
Yeah.
really need to keep moving?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. In motion, that's important. And I think the key too is at the core of it. It's having a game plan and a routine in your day. It's been disrupted, but you can still create a routine. And the physical health requirements are fairly straightforward. But often we need to think about it. Maybe we had utilized a lot of other services for our food and nutritional regime, and so now we're perhaps shopping differently, eating differently, staying as consistent as you can, and making sure that your nutritional support systems are in place. Your fluids, lots of water, obviously, being able to make sure that you're staying hydrated, and adapt your routine so that you are reminded about that, because sometimes you get caught in technology and the day disappears, and you go, what happened? And maybe you haven't had a chance to eat or drink properly. And so stay at the core of it. And then exercise, from my point of view, it's like I used to always pretty much most days go to the gym, and have a trainer working with me. So here I'm more isolated, so I was able to bring like a stationary hand ergometer up, in my home, and it's a fairly basic one, but it really gives me the ability to get a little bit of cardio. When I'm out wheeling, people often don't think, this, when you're wheeling, you're like 4 feet tall, and everything kind of rains down on you. So you're on high COVID alert, and your wheels, they're wheeling through God knows what out on the sidewalks and the roads. And so it was recommended for me to just to be really really limit my external engagement. So that meant I had to modify the internal exercises, breathing, core exercises, various mobility elements related to your shoulders and arms, and and make sure that was integrated and modified. Then I guess the other piece is that the psychological and the mental and emotional side of things is also important. And I've been very fortunate that I've introduced in my life early an ability to meditate, and so I've extended that through this COVID era, and I find that being able to take the time to meditate has been really grounding and leveling. Takes a lot of the vibration out of and the anxiety or the complexity of your world, and it lets you settle. And I stumbled on it through a fellow Paralympic athlete, Daniel Wesley, who was on our team, and he used to meditate at in the early days. So we kind of teased him about it because this was really out there, back in the late '70s, early '80s, and but here I found myself before the tour was starting, completely overwhelmed with the stress, and I said, "Hey, maybe I should try this." And he said, "Yeah," and he set me up with his teacher, and the next thing you know, I felt like the whole world had been lifted off my shoulders, and so that's served me well, in this context of dealing with that holistic approach towards health.
And that's something that really everybody can do. We can all sit back and take a little breath. And
Yeah,
I
yeah,
know what you mean about the days just kind of cycling one into the next, right? We
yeah.
don't know what day it is sometimes. They're all the same.
Yeah, and of course, if people are using technology, there's a tendency to be sitting a lot, and body's not meant to sit. I know that for sure. I've been sitting most of my life for basically 18 hours a day, and so you need to take countermeasures. Get yourself out of the sitting position, get moving, and change it up, and then ultimately do the things that are necessary to be able to balance and keep the body going in the ways that it's mostly supposed to. But also, if people are immobilized in varying ways
Right.
physically, then I keep reflecting back on one of my role models. His name was Gary McPherson. He had polio back in the 50s, and he could really only uh, move part of his one leg, and it was in the extension mode. And so when he was sitting in his wheelchair, he could only extend one leg off the floor and push and propel his wheelchair backwards. And Gary would go to the University of Alberta Butterdome and push his wheelchair around the track, the internal track, and that was his cardio. And that guy did it almost every day regularly. And it's that old adage, the Nike phrase, if you have a body, you're an athlete. And even if you couldn't move any of your arms or legs, you can still breathe. Most people can. Some people are higher and need assistance. But if you can breathe, you can get a cardio exercise if you're guided appropriately by the right people. And breathing is completely underutilized in today's society. And so I would highly recommend people, researching and considering that as an alternative.
Good advice for all of us, for sure. Now, earlier we talked about some of your Hall of Fame connections, and this year for 2020, you know very well two of our 2020 inductees that we're celebrating this year. Kathy Newman, who's being honored with the W.A.C. Bennett Award, and Sonia Gaudette, who's being inducted as an athlete. She's a wheelchair curler. Can you talk about your relationship with these two wonderful people?
Oh my gosh. Well, first of all, a huge congratulations to both of them. They're amazing human beings. Kathy Newman. Well, Kathy has been literally a pillar of leadership, inspiration, and support for the Paralympic community, and particularly with BC Wheelchair Sports, wheelchair, rugby and wheelchair basketball for many decades. As a young athlete, she was there as part of an organization that helped nurture and encourage me, and I just have nothing but respect for her. She's a phenomenal human being, and she's given of herself in service, working in the background, helping set up opportunities for people to have the services they need, the facilities, the programs, the resources, and so much more. And she's gone over and above and beyond the call of duty, putting in her personal time long when the offices have been closed, and she's extended her leadership nationally and globally. So she's a British Columbian, through and through, but she's always thinking about the global context as well. And so we wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for her incredible leadership. and I have nothing but respect and admiration for it. It's a well-deserved tribute to be inducted into the Hall of Fame. And of course, Sonia. Well, uh, Sonia is one of the most amazing, again, human beings that you could ever met. People who know her, they just they're so magnetized by her enthusiasm, her love and respect for other people, and then as an athlete, she made the adaptation to get engaged again after her injury, and as a curler, well, she's legendary, but also she's paid it forward and given back to so many people in sport and beyond, and has been a champion for accessibility and inclusion. Has also been an ambassador for our foundation, and I just think there's nobody better who represents the core of an athlete than Sonia, and a well-deserved tribute. And her story, of course, will inspire so many in the future. But again, I'm honored to know both of them, and thrilled that they're in the hall.
They are both heroes for sure, and the Hall of
Yeah.
Fame again is full of heroes and wonderful stories. Now, Rick, people are going through a tough time right now. Everyone has their challenges, and maybe if they've been watching this today and they're going, well, it's fine for Rick Hansen to talk about being resilient and transcending challenges, and but he's Rick Hansen. What can I do? I'm just Jane Doe, and I'm hurting, and I'm really struggling. What advice would you have for these folks?
Well, the first thing is that it doesn't matter who you are as a human being and what you've accomplished. Adversity, doesn't discriminate, and also the basic skills, to be able to address diversity are mostly available to everyone. And so, I think the biggest mistake in perpetuating perhaps the stories of people in the hall or others is to sort of place them on such a pedestal that the basic humanity and competencies seem unreachable or disconnected from who I am. And so I know, for instance, as an example, talking to Terry Fox, that like Terry, he was a great friend and a really phenomenal guy, and but you wouldn't pick him out of the crowd, right? He was, he did so much, but he just pulled in some of those key ingredients, and he applied it, either dealing with his cancer in sport or on his marathon of hope, and so there's a bit of Terry Fox in all of us, and I think that's important, and so, but I think the first thing I would say to those people who are suffering, no matter who you are, is that I feel for you, and I understand that you're suffering, and it's real, and so therefore, part of that is to go through the process, and there's no playbook. It's magic, it's everybody has their own journey, but encourage people to realize that they do have control over their attitude on how they view the situation. They do have control over how they assimilate information in order to make choices. They do have control over being open to lean on and use your family or your community and support or resources that are out there. And they do have choices to set baby goals, and just feel like you have a little bit of control, and start to reframe the agenda in your favor, and ultimately, you never know how far you'll be able to go. And remember, we're not a burden when we're in that struggling mode, because the humanity of all of us, we want to be connected. People want to help. We love, we care, we contribute, and that's strength, and it's societal building, not a burden or a challenge. And so, if you incorporate those elements, and you realize that you're actually making a difference by reaching out and being connected, and people who know you will go, wow, she didn't give up. She took a baby step, and she's still going, and so I have to reframe and think about what I'm doing, and it just goes on and on, because we share stories and we're just human beings.
Rick, those are such wise and inspiring words. I'm afraid our time is up. I can't believe that time flies, and it has with us today. Thank you so much for being a guest with us. I'd like to thank you again and remind everyone, if they want to help folks with disabilities, please reach out to the Rick Hansen Foundation at www.rickhansen.com. My thanks again to Rick Hansen, and please everyone check out Rick's story and all the great stories of our inductees and honored members at the BC Sports Hall of Fame website. Thank you, and please stay safe, everyone.
Thanks, Wendy. Thanks, Nick. And thanks to the BC Sports Hall of Fame.